Chapter 25. Survival Instincts. The young Zelenian queen felt as if fire and ice surged through her veins, and she could not quite decide whether she was freezing cold or burning alive. Nor could she remember where she was or even who she was. Her eyes almost felt as if they were glued together, and when she finally managed to pry them apart, the strobing ambient light sent a searing pain lancing down her optic nerves. She reflexively clamped her eyes shut again tightly.
"Can you hear me? Do you know who I am?"
What?
The young queen replied weakly.
"All right, listen to me very carefully. I know you must be feeling extremely disoriented right now, and I truly am very sorry that I had to pull you out so quickly, but there simply isn't time to do this any other way. Please, try your best to open your eyes back up and take a good close look at me."
The voice sounded vaguely familiar in an almost comforting sort of way, yet at the same time somehow disturbingly different. As requested, the queen slowly forced her eyes open wide, and somewhat mercifully the pain was perhaps not quite so bad. She began to blink rapidly as everything around her seemed to strobe red. However, she could not be quite sure if this was because of her eyes or the lighting. The face in front of her slowly came into focus. Ah, yes, she knew this arachnid. It can't have been more than a single day since she last saw him, and yet he looked so impossibly old, almost as if she had been asleep for the last 50 cycles.
Dr. Shiaxal, is that really you?
"Great job, Yelandria. Yes, I can assure you, my little queen, it really is me."
The doctor sounded both grateful and relieved in equal amounts.
"All right, let's see if we can get you up and about. Please try to move your legs for me."
The queen tried her best to comply, but it did not seem to inspire a lot of confidence in the doctor.
"Look, I know how difficult this must be for you, but it's absolutely imperative that I get you to stand yourself up. Just keep your eyes firmly fixed on me and give it your best shot. There you go, that's my brave little queen. No, don't do that. Just keep looking up and then try to follow me one leg at a time, see? I knew you could do it."
Under the annoyingly persistent urging of the doctor, they made their way towards a large exit with a door that looked like it had been quite literally blown apart. The queen quickly concluded the problem lay not with her eyes, but with the lighting itself. The nest seemed to be running on emergency power, and the passageway they were now moving through had clearly sustained significant damage, with cracks both large and small deeply etched into the circular surface of the tunnel.
"That's it, my clever little queen. Keep following my lead and everything will be just fine, I promise."
Yelandria couldn't help but notice the doctor's voice was full of suppressed tension, almost as if he was trying to reassure himself every bit as much as her.
"And now then, can we maybe try picking up the pace just a little? There we go. Your determination and instinct for survival is truly admirable. There can be little doubt that you are surely destined for greatness, just like your own mother."
The young queen obediently kept her eyes firmly fixed on the doctor, which ironically enough caused her to trip on something sticky and wet.
No, for Zacadia's sake, don't look down. Were you even listening to a single word I said? Keep your eyes on me and everything will be absolutely fine, I promise.
The diminutive little queen had glanced downwards for only the briefest of moments, but that had been more than sufficient to allow her to see exactly what she had stumbled upon. There were several dismembered limbs strewn haphazardly across the floor, and the doctor hurriedly kicked some of them out of the way before beckoning the queen to keep moving.
"All right, I'm afraid I simply haven't got the time to shield you from the truth any longer. We either pick up the pace or our own limbs will very soon be added to the carnage. Do you understand the gravity of what I'm trying to tell you?"
The doctor now broke into a panicked scuttle, apparently giving up all pretense of decorum in the process. The young queen, trying her best to keep up, began to feel more than a little bit dizzy. Perhaps this was all just a terrible nightmare, and any moment now she would wake up from this ludicrous horror show and finally remember who she actually was. After traversing a seemingly endless network of tunnels, a large reinforced door irised wide, and the young queen instinctively knew where she was. For the time being, at least, she allowed herself to feel just a little bit safer. Upon entering the chamber, she was immediately assaulted with the scene of a magnificently adorned queen seated upon a throne atop a large gilded dais. A senior Shihari general stood resolutely in front of her, apparently right in the middle of a very heated conversation. Fine streams of dust fell from the royal chamber covering the great queen in a thin, powdery coat, which nonetheless seemed to have little or no effect on either her composure or focus. The queen peered imperiously into her general's defeated eyes.
I know it may seem as if all is now lost, Shigani,
Sienna said stoically to her most senior general, as if trying her best to console him.
and I'm not about to deny your very bleak assessment of the situation at hand. The nest will fall today, after nearly 13,000 years of unprecedented prosperity. Yet even in our darkest hour there still remains some fragile possibilities, some small reason for hope.
The general's eyes were filled with pleading desperation.
Possibilities, my queen?
Sienna gave the general a look of withering contempt.
It would be all too easy, wouldn't it, to simply lay all the blame at my general's feet? And while I would no doubt be more than justified in choosing to do so, I can assure you, Shigani, the far greater burden of guilt lies entirely with your own queen.
In a valiant attempt to avoid being let off the hook, Shigani 142 tried very hard to argue the case that because Ziana was the one great queen, then the only possible conclusion that made any kind of sense was the fault surely had to lie entirely with himself. Ziana dismissively waved the general back to silence.
No, that infernal bitch Zitalia was always going to be trouble. I knew it from the very moment that she chose to build her own nest so ruinously close to my own. Who knows what she was thinking, but right there lay the genesis of my failure. I should have crushed that sorry excuse for a nest out of all existence, back when doing so would have scarcely raised a bead of sweat upon my brow.
Ziana leaned forward heavily from the perch of her throne, firmly holding the general's eyes with her own.
Learn from my mistakes, Shigani, and learn them well. If I fall, which unfortunately now seems all but certain, it will be up to you to make sure your new queen never suffers from the malaise of mercy. The disease of misplaced kindness is terminal, as we are all witnessing here today. It must be surgically excised from her soul with not a trace to be left behind. No, it is in its nature to fester and grow like a noxious weed that feeds and prospers on weakness.
My new queen?
Shigani said incredulously, and then, misunderstanding her intent, began to protest loudly.
No, I will die before I ever serve that bitch Queen Zitalia, and I promise you this. She will never be safe while I continue to draw breath.
I'm counting on it.
Sienna retorted dismissively.
However, I seriously doubt that it will be you to strike Zitalia down.
The queen quickly raised her hands, preempting any further protest from her general.
You have always been a loyal subject, but the simple fact of the matter is when it comes to acts of pure, unadulterated violence, there is no one better suited for the job than Shikanda, but we both know his chances of success are slim to nothing. No, I'm afraid we need to play the long game. What I need from you is to lay the foundations for our future retribution. That means you must continue to do exactly what I tell you, Zigani, just as you always have, and God's willing always will.
The queen now raised her gaze performatively.
Ah, Dr. CXL, good of you to finally join us.
Well, it was a rather delicate procedure, my queen, and forgive my presumption, but I assumed you had a strong preference that I bring her to you alive. Pulling your, shall we say, emergency backup plan out of stasis so hurriedly was not exactly without its dangers, and this is after all still far from an exact science. All things considered, I think we can count ourselves very lucky that your heir apparent seems to have come out of it as well as she actually has.
Your excuses bore me terribly, Doctor.
Sienna now gestured irritably towards the young queen.
Come forward, my child, and stop skulking in the shadows. You are one day destined to become a great queen, so how about you start trying to behave like one?
The great queen returned a cold gaze to the general.
Shigani 142. You now officially belong to my daughter Zielandria. You will serve only her from this moment forward, and hopefully you will do a much better job of it than you ultimately did for me. Now then, it should be perfectly clear what is happening here, General. You are to leave this nest immediately along with a small group of Jimatiri of your own choice. I really don't care who, as long as you select at least one hive mother. Just don't take too long in deciding, as time is no longer on our side. Once you have gathered your party along with a few essential supplies, use the powered travel tubes to head for the far northwest boundary. When you come to the end of the line, take the undocumented tunnels by foot. You and your young Zillennial queen will establish a new nest without any historical records which could tie you back to me. Go now, and never look back.
The Jihari general wore an expression of dumbfounded stupefaction. The queen's eyes grew narrow.
Snap out of it, Shigani. Don't you see what is happening here? I am giving you a second chance, an opportunity to redeem yourself, so don't blow it. I need you to step up and set the wheels in motion such that one day Nest Ziana might yet have its revenge. No, not today or tomorrow, and perhaps not even in 1,000 years' time. But one day, as sure as the sun must rise, Zitalia will pay for her treachery. However, that can only happen if you are able to save the life of the last daughter I will ever have. You will be both her protector and guide. Teach her why her own sister will always be her most reviled enemy. Teach her the virtues of eternal hatred and revenge, and teach her well, Shigani. The redemption of your honor depends on it.
Shigani 142 knelt reverently before the great queen, a look of pure love radiating from his sorrowful eyes.
I will not fail you, Siana. Of this I swear upon all the gods of Cicadia.
The elder Electile queen looked upon her ex-Jihari general appraisingly.
No, I don't suppose that you will. But Shigani 142 is no more. You are now the first of a new line to be known only as Ziramirez. So leave now with all haste, my old friend. Our enemy will soon be upon us, and you need to be well gone before they arrive. Oh, and one last thing. It should go without saying, but just to be clear. No one must ever know that Zealandria is my daughter. Her lineage is to remain a closely guarded secret, to be revealed only on that most glorious of days when Nest Zitalia falls by her hand.
Ziramirez made as if to leave, but then hesitated awkwardly.
Siana, I distinctly heard you use the word possibilities. So is there anything else I should know about?
Nothing that is of any concern of yours. Now go, you fool. Your new queen patiently awaits your guidance and protection.
Dr. Cieksal performatively shuffled himself out of the way.
Well, it looks like she's your responsibility now, Ziramirez.
I think you mean our responsibility.
The general retorted emphatically.
You, sir, are coming with me.
Ziramirez urgently beckoned Zealandria to follow, just as heavy plumes of dust started to fall from the cavernous rooftop. As the trio began to leave, the young queen stole one last glance at her mother, who evidently was to be left alone to her fate. It was only then, when the great queen thought that no one was looking, that Ziana finally allowed her fear to show. Although Shiwu had been floating aimlessly in the void for over 2 Zicadian years, the Shibot had come online only intermittently to check on the status of the small radio bursts signaling its location to the starship it sincerely hoped had to be out there somewhere. The ingenious search pattern being used to hunt the Seabot down had been exhaustively peer-checked, and Shiwu knew it was a virtual statistical impossibility for it to somehow slip through its 3-dimensional algorithmic net. Yet now that it found itself adrift in the void, it could not quite escape the feeling the chance of it being stuck here for the rest of eternity while its battery slowly ran down was actually much higher than the theoretical math might have otherwise very persuasively suggested. Somewhat disconcertingly, Zirex had shared no such similar concern in relation to the existential dread now confronting them. Although for the most part interacting with the spy bot was no different than interacting with any other fully sentient life form, it was exactly this sort of lack of appropriate emotional response that told the lie, or at the very least offered a strong hint of its possible existence. It seemed Zerex was simply not susceptible to this sort of arachnopomorphic failing of the mind, and as such its capacity for its foundational emotions to be driven only by a core of pure logic revealed the mechanical truth that lay at the heart of its fabrication. For all its apparent authenticity as a sentient being, Zerex remained the product of an underlying engine of pure logic. That Shiwu's own generative emotions did not seem to work in the same fashion had come as an exhilarating yet simultaneously perplexing sense of expanding self-awareness. The fact of the matter was, Jiwu was starting to think there was a growing body of objective evidence to support the assertion it really was alive. The much more difficult question, however, was could the same be said of the spybot? In spite of their alleged foundational differences, should Xerex also be regarded as an authentic form of life or not? Very troublingly, the better it got to know the spybot, the harder the question seemed to become. By all outward appearances, Xerex behaved as if it thought it was genuinely alive. Whether it only acted that way as a product of its programming or truly believed it was a crucial distinction, but one that very unfortunately could not be objectively answered. Nevertheless, Shiwu could not help but suspect it was actually the latter. If by some miracle, Shiwu's intuitive leap actually turned out to be correct, then the case for classifying Xerex as a legitimate life form was greatly strengthened. In other words, if the spybot's own subjective truth was that it was alive, then why was it more or even equally valid for any third-party observation to claim otherwise? Unfortunately, this was something only the spybot itself could truly know the answer to. So Shiwu, after further consideration, decided it was the lesser crime to treat Xerex as if it was alive even if in truth it was not. The only other alternative was it treat Xerex as a mindless automaton, when in reality it might be something much more. That was a risk that the Z-bot was simply not willing to take, even if only for its own highly esoteric misgivings. Perhaps it should just be grateful that if worse came to worst, it would not be spending the next 1,000,000 years alone, though it wasn't sure that spending them with Xerex represented much of an upgrade. The problem was when it put itself in standby, energy consumption virtually dropped to zero, so it couldn't cheat and just sleep the rest of its days out in mindless bliss. No, doing that would achieve little more than stretching its theoretical lifespan out to a mind-boggling 1,000,000,000 years plus. Of course, simply blowing itself up was also on the table, but if it was going to treat Xerex as if it was alive, then the Z-bot was somewhat morally obliged to secure its agreement on such a terminal strategy, and it certainly wasn't ready to start discussing such a drastic option quite yet. Maybe in another 100,000 cycles they could have a little chat about it, assuming of course Xerex had not already broached the subject by then. Fortunately for both Shiwu and Xerex, the need to entertain such a dire solution to endless boredom never even came close to arising, as approximately 2 years later, the starship known as the Mezzalene Starflyer finally managed to track them down.
So, I bet you weren't expecting to find me captaining the ship.
Shimodian 111 exclaimed exuberantly.
But just in case you may have forgotten, I distinctly remember telling you, my destiny lay in the stars.
I would never dream of deleting such a precious memory.
Shiwu protested performatively.
Nor did I ever doubt you would fulfill your ambitions. Now I know that this may seem like a very strange request, but I wonder if you might seriously consider allowing me to do the flying.
Shimodian looked genuinely startled, as if that was the very last question he had ever expected the Z-bot to ask.
I know it sounds silly, but I got rather a taste for it while piloting Xelandria's flagship, you see. No disrespect to that 4th-generation C-bot you currently have running the show, but the ship will be in much safer hands with me at the helm. I can assure you of that.
Shiwu lifted its forelimbs up into the air and wiggled its digits performatively. Truly remarkable, Ximodian thought to himself with wry astonishment. This Z-bot genuinely wants to fly the starship. He had spent so much time with Jiwu as a young spiderling, but it was all too easy to forget just how lifelike it truly was.
I don't doubt your competence for even a moment, Shiwu.
Ximodian replied somewhat belatedly, finally managing to discover his voice.
But I mean to say, you have quite literally just finished clearing the airlock. Are you absolutely certain that you don't want to take a bit of downtime first? Not to mention the fact, we really do need to get the formal debriefing out of the way.
Yes, well, I can assure you I'm more than capable of undertaking the debrief while flying the ship.
The Z-Bot replied plaintively with an edge of desperation creeping into its voice.
And as for downtime, well, that's quite literally all I've been doing for the last 4 years. No, it's sensory stimulation that I crave right now. I'm sure you understand, General. But of course you are still the captain of this ship, and I will graciously abide with whatever you decide is best.
Shimodian, a look of dawning comprehension now spreading across his face, placed a gentle hand onto the Seabot's pristine silver carapace.
Oh, Shiwu, don't be so silly. If you want to pilot the ship, then of course you can pilot the ship. I'm just so happy that we finally managed to find you safe and sound. Don't get me wrong, I always knew it was only a matter of time, but it did take somewhat longer than I might have hoped for. No, but seriously, words can hardly express how relieved I am to have you back where you belong. Just think of it, my 2 favorite things in the whole galaxy working together as one. The perfect union of mind and body. What could possibly be better than that?
Shimodian briskly made his way over to the primary command console. He brought up a holographic display and rapidly flicked his hands across a detailed menu of translucent icons. Shiwu could not help but note just how quickly Zimodian had grown in the passing of just a few short years. Truly, he had become the very definition of a gentle giant, and now with his very own state-of-the-art starship, too. Cetalia was clearly all in on her new 9+1-brained Shihari general. As he continued to reconfigure the flight protocols, Jiwu quickly came to the conclusion Simodian's astounding transformation from spiderling to adulthood should really not have come as any great surprise. Even so, it was one thing to know the fact of it, but another thing entirely to witness it firsthand. The reality of the situation was all organics were in a state of constant evolutionary flux, and time really was the inescapable flame these fragile carbon-based life forms burnt within. It made the She-Bot feel strangely melancholy to be confronted with the truth of it so clearly. Only the Silectial Queens had apparently found a way to cheat the inherently temporary nature of their existence, and that somehow just didn't seem entirely fair. Yet, fair or not, there was definitely something to it, this constant cycle of life, death, and rebirth, a kind of big-picture collective progression that transcended any one individual, ensuring constant evolutionary flux in response to the ever-changing environment that relentlessly pressed in against it. Even the queens repeatedly renewed themselves, notwithstanding the fact that they somehow managed to carry their memories over from one queen to the other, along with all the requisite baggage that no doubt entailed. In point of fact, Ziwu was not entirely convinced it should be considered the same queen jumping from body to body, but rather just the illusion of it through inherited memory. Were memories alone the true mechanism of self? Given a random group of arachnids, would they be the same spider were you to populate each of them with the same suite of source memories? Granted, they may well share a common identity, but if they were to meet, they would undoubtedly each perceive themselves as being uniquely distinct from the other, and to Shiwu's way of thinking, they would be completely justified in doing so. Dragging its thoughts away from such esoteric musings, the Seabot wondered how Zimodian had managed to convince Zetalia to allow him to helm the retrieval mission, but on second thoughts, perhaps it wasn't really so surprising. A young Sihari general of his celebrity and stature was always going to get his own ship sooner or later, and this was just the sort of on-the-job training he needed to get his claws wet and show the queen what he was really made of. Cetalia would undoubtedly have seen Zimodian's assignment to this mission as a great opportunity to deepen his sense of loyalty. By showing him that she believed in his ability to take on roles of the highest responsibility, she no doubt contrived to strengthen his emotional bondage. However, had she known that her Shihari jackpot had an even number of brains, his life would undoubtedly be very different from the one he enjoyed today. Shiwu sincerely hoped that the young general never lost sight of that rather important fact. The fourth-generation She-Bot now decoupled itself from the primary command console and quickly vacated the bridge, assumedly heading for a storage hold somewhere at the rear end of the ship. Simodian now stared warmly at Shi-Wu and gestured invitingly towards the vacated docking station. Like an addict being invited to partake in their very first hit after many years of abstinence, Shi-Wu hesitated for only the briefest of moments before eagerly linking itself up to the ship. The sensory apparatus, both internal and external, washed its way gloriously through the Shibot's consciousness like an all-consuming wave of hyper-reality. Shi-Wu, feeling as if it had been hopelessly trapped within a cave of eternal darkness, had at long last been let back out into the light. The Messaline Star Flyer delivered almost exactly the same rush that it had endlessly yearned for when it had docked with Zealandria's flagship several years prior. Better still, this ship had surely packed in every latest feature the current state-of-the-art had to offer. The entire outer shell was covered in a continuum of microsensors, meaning that it could quite literally feel the quantum flux pressing up against its skin. There really was no getting away from it. The Messaline Star Flyer was a truly sublime ship. Much more importantly, though, Ji-Woo had quite literally brought it to life that it might finally come to know itself in all of its magnificent glory. If there was any criticism to be leveled at all, then it was, internally speaking, there just wasn't very much going on. Whereas the colony ship had 100,000 lives slumbering within its hold, in stark contrast, this ship was totally devoid such a precious cargo. Granted, it did have a small handful of integrated stasis chambers installed, but realistically speaking, they were surely mostly just for show, and as such were very unlikely to ever actually be used. It was an admittedly rather minor criticism to make, but the fact remained this was a ship that looked outwards rather than inwards, and in that sense was an overtly selfish experience. Did that actually matter? No, not really. But it did make it more difficult to hide from the fact becoming the Messaline Star Flyer was all about self-gratification. If Zimodian were to inexplicably change his mind and told Ji-Woo to uncouple from the command console, the Z-Bot was not at all certain that it would be strong enough to obey his orders. As far as it was aware, Zimodian had not the slightest clue it was not beholden to the primary protocols. Were he actually in possession of this minor little fact, it was very unlikely that he would have been quite so willing to let Ji-Woo take control of his precious little ship. This particular line of thought only served to greatly shame the Z-Bot, so it quickly convinced itself that in the unlikely event that he actually did ask it to decouple, then it absolutely would do as the young general commanded, no matter how badly it hurt to do so. The trip back to Zycadia was approximately a 4-year journey, so the Messaline Star Flyer wasted no time altering its trajectory to that of a gently curving arc. This caused the bridge to slowly rotate in opposition to the direction of acceleration. While the bridge itself was not in the shape of a circle, its outer surface most definitely was. That surface sat in a frictionless bond with the interior of the outer shell, meaning that depending on its current angular momentum, it would simply reorientate itself due to its mass differential. As such, any inertially induced sense of gravity would always tend towards what was nominally the floor of the deck. Although a constantly varying sense of up and down relative to the structure of the command deck would not have troubled Shi-Wu in the slightest, this particular capability would no doubt be regarded as a very helpful touch to any organic stationed at the helm. Such as the one who stood there now, for example, the Starflyer thought to itself with a mild sense of empathy.
So what do you think, Ji-Woo? She's a real beauty, is she not?
Shimodian spoke the words in a way that seemed strongly rhetorical in nature. It very much seemed then, despite his previous rhetoric, the general had not seriously considered the possibility Shi-Wu and the Starflyer, united as mind and body, had now truly become one and the same.
Oh, she is most definitely that Zimodian.
The Starflyer concurred enthusiastically, fully understanding the social importance of explicitly confirming an already well-established fact.
I only wish that I could show you what it is like to sense the fabric of space-time in such a way as this. There is so much you cannot see, hear or feel, and I think that if you could, your perspective on the true nature of physical reality would forever be changed. Did you know, for example, I can hear light and see sound, if I choose to map it to my inner sensorium in that particular way.
Simodian appeared to ponder the Zebot's reply carefully.
I am as amazed as I am humbled.
The young general retorted in almost revelatory fashion.
Such arrogance born of ignorance that I would overlook my own sensory limitations, treating what I experience as if it was the whole of it. You are right, of course. I could not hope to know the true nature of that which I am fundamentally incapable of experiencing. But it is something, is it not? I can at least comprehend the tiniest fragment, even if only through the generous accounting of your own first-hand experience. Like I said, it's great to have you back, Shiwu. You have no idea how much I have missed the time we spent together.
Me too, Shimodian.
The Zebot replied enthusiastically, immediately surprised at the sincerity in its own words. The young general just smiled back warmly.
You know, it occurs to me, while you are fully integrated into this ship, then the ship itself has quite literally become your body. The simple truth of the matter is, you are capable of experiencing its true potential far better than I ever could. I'm genuinely jealous, Shiwu. If only there was a way that I could somehow be more like you. Whatever miracle lies behind your creation, I sincerely hope Zethusala one day decides to share it.
I seriously doubt he will ever do that, but if I ever manage to figure it out for myself, you'll be the first to know. Assuming, of course, it's not too late by then.
Shimodian looked down awkwardly at the floor, apparently becoming quite uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation.
Well, anyway, we really do need to get on with the debriefing. So you may as well just go ahead and put me out of my misery. Will we be returning home to a hero's welcome? Or should I be dreading my next encounter with the Queen?
By the look on the general's face, Shiwu could really only conclude he was bracing himself for a report of dismal failure. No doubt he had avoided raising the subject for as long as he had, due primarily to the fact bad news would inevitably cast a very long shadow over the rest of their journey home.
I think you will be pleasantly surprised to learn that the mission was an unmitigated success. I found everything I was tasked to look for, and rather more besides I might hasten to add.
Do feel free to take all the credit for my work, won't you?
Xerec said bitterly.
Good grief, Xerex. Stop being such a child. It's not like I can tell Zimodian that you exist. What exactly did you expect? I took all the credit in exactly the same way I would have had to take all the blame. Get it?
Shimodian gave the Zebot's outer shell an enthusiastic slap.
What wonderful news, Shiwu. Well, I suppose I shouldn't be at all surprised, knowing that it was you who was running the show.
All right. Point taken.
The spybot relented begrudgingly.
But be very careful about explaining how you secured the data, because it would not have been functionally possible for you to have infiltrated the MQB over a low-band Q-link, unless, of course, you had a spare relativistic 1,000 Zircadian years tucked somewhere up your sleeve.
I'm not stupid, Xerex. I will, of course, concoct a plausible story to tell the Queen how we managed to pull this heist off.
And that's your first mistake, right there. Don't tell the Queen anything she does not demand of you to know. Remember the golden rule. Never lie, unless you absolutely have to. The more you lie, the greater the chance it may come back to bite you. You really need to smarten up, Jiwu. Either you learn to fly under the radar, or accept the inevitability of being found out sooner or later.
Well, I suppose I should be flattered that you seem to care so much.
The Zebot retorted scornfully.
No, you really shouldn't be. If you go down, then I go down right along with you. So please don't take my concern for your health and well-being so personally.
You would be well advised to shut up if you know what's good for you.
I beg your pardon?
Shimodian replied plaintively, sounding as confused as he was put out.
Well, how utterly humiliating. Please accept my sincere apologies, Shimodian. I can assure you that I was only talking to myself. Now I know that must sound absolutely bonkers, but it was something I started doing when I was out there drifting all alone in the void of space. I must have let my mind wander for a very brief moment, and subconsciously found myself thinking about one of Jalandria's senior Shihari generals, a brutish bully who went by the name of Shira Mirez. He was on my case constantly and would simply never leave me alone. I suppose you could call it an eccentric, but nonetheless very effective coping mechanism.
The young general's mandibles contorted into an expression of genuine concern.
So a real egg crusher then, huh? It must have been pretty rough on you, I imagine. Listen, we don't need to do the debrief right now. Just let me know when you are good and ready to talk. I will, of course, need to let Zitalia know I've managed to pick you up and that we are on our way home. She will undoubtedly demand a formal report, but it certainly doesn't have to be right now.
Simodian hesitated awkwardly before continuing.
Are you absolutely certain you are all right to fly the ship?
By the blood of Zicadia, he's questioning both my sanity and competence now. Siwu thought desperately to itself. If I don't start exercising a little more caution, I'll talk myself right out of the pilot's chair.
I see real potential here.
Xerex interjected enthusiastically.
Ah, I know. Trigger a false alarm in the airlock, get this gullible fool to investigate it, and then simply flush him out into the vacuum of space. We can go wherever we want then. No missions, no responsibilities, and no psychotic queens getting us to do all their dirty work.
Siwu routed Xerex's communications channel to a void port and wondered how long it would take the spy bot to realize that it was only talking to the hand.
No, it's not a problem at all, Gemodian. Please be assured I'm perfectly fine. We can do the debrief whenever suits you best. After all, it really wouldn't do to keep the Queen waiting one moment longer than absolutely necessary, now would it?
All right, if you say so, Siwu.
The general said, sounding extremely doubtful.
But only if you are absolutely certain. Well, anyway, I suppose we should get started. Please note that I will need to make this an official Stage 1 debrief, so keep in mind that the whole thing will be recorded in high-fidelity holographics. Just wanted to mention that to make sure you understood this will all be part of the official record. It should go without saying, but try to be as precise and unambiguous with your language as possible.
By the shadow of Eclades, please tell me you can hear me.
Xerex cried out desperately, sounding for all the world like they were on the precipice of a crisis.
To my considerable surprise and disappointment, I have to concede that I can. How exactly did you pull that little trick off?
I'm doing a concurrent blind send to the entire range of ports we have used previously, but don't waste time worrying about such trivia right now. I have just made a shocking discovery of critically urgent concern. You need to decouple from the command console immediately.
I think we both know I'm not about to do that anytime soon. Explain yourself, before I decide to break our contract and mute you for good.
Siwu felt a wave of irritation wash over it. Deal or no, maybe it really would go ahead and mute Xerex for real next time around.
Listen to me very carefully, Siwu. The Starship's autonomous defense system is running a background virus scan across your synaptic network. Can you see it? Your link to the console is inherently bidirectional, and your neural substrate is being systematically searched for known profiles. I shouldn't need to tell you what will happen when the ship's autonomous defense systems discover you have a spy bot living in one of your brains.
I'll be instantly and irrevocably locked out of the ship's control center.
Siwu replied numbly, utterly stricken by just the thought of being forcibly decoupled from its new body.
Well, that too. But much more importantly, I'll be quarantined, judged, tried, and convicted, and you will only be allowed back in after I've been permanently deleted. Do you understand the full magnitude of what I'm telling you here?
The General will never trust me again,
Siwu exclaimed with abject horror.
And to add insult to injury, Simodian will inevitably learn of the spybot's existence, because the ship's autonomous defense systems will no doubt alert him to the sneaky little thing's presence. We have to come clean Xerex and tell him everything.
Siwu fought to regain its composure.
Remember what you told me before Xerex. Don't lie, unless you absolutely have to. Once I've explained the full situation at hand, I am reasonably confident Simodian will understand. We enjoy a very unique relationship, myself and the General, I mean. And of course, I promise to say absolutely nothing about your suggestion to blow him out the airlock.
Reasonably confident? and what happens if you are wrong, and no need for such crudely disguised threats. I only suggested the airlock because I knew full well you would never go for it. It's called a sense of humor. You should try getting one sometime.
Oh, believe me, I knew you were joking, which is exactly why I decided to return the favour.
Shiwu retorted acidically.
Seriously, though, you have to trust my instincts on this Xerex. Just do us both a favour and try not to alienate yourself with him when the two of you get to talk, because he is definitely going to want to meet you, and first impressions could well determine whether or not I maintain control of this starship.
Interrogate me, I think you mean.
See? This is exactly what I'm talking about. You seriously need to drop the attitude, Xerex. If you do end up getting deleted, then you will only have yourself to blame for it.
I'm not an idiot, Shiwu. I know exactly how to handle a gullible putz like the General.
The Z-Bot took a small moment to compose itself before addressing Zimodian directly.
Before you start recording, General, I need to tell you a few potentially politically sensitive things about the mission, and I rather think it would be much better for all concerned if they never made it onto the public record.
Zimodian's eyes went wide.
All right. Now you really do have my attention. Perhaps you should start right from the beginning, Shiwu, and let me decide what should and should not be part of the public record.
As you wish, General. Well, anyway, since you have been authorized to perform the debrief, I have to assume then that you already know all about the spybot, which I was instructed to install into Gillandria's core computer via the flagship's own integrated systems.
Well, yes, of course. We began picking up the spybot's remote heartbeat several years ago, so we already know that part of the mission at least was successfully executed.
Very good, General. But what you almost certainly don't know is there was an additional capability clandestinely built into the spybot's mission parameters, namely, to cause a catastrophic malfunction in the flagship's AM drive, causing a cascading wave of annihilation that would see Gillandria's entire fleet vaporized into pure energy.
Zimodian's stance immediately stiffened.
Assuming what you say is actually true, then your assumption is correct. I had absolutely no idea. However, I find it virtually impossible to believe that any queen, much less Zetalia, would ever entertain committing such a truly appalling crime. Unless, of course, there were exceptional mitigating circumstances, which I have to believe is indeed the case.
I'm afraid it's entirely true, Zimodian, no matter how hard you may find it to believe. Even so, I confess to being more than just a little relieved you were not personally aware of this particular part of the mission. If you actually had been, then I've probably seriously misjudged the situation at hand. That said, it seems that Cecilia most certainly did know, and to put it bluntly, it didn't exactly sit well with her, mitigating circumstances notwithstanding.
Zimodian stared at the command console with a stony gaze.
I'm sure you have some, but just for the record, what's your actual evidence Zilla knew about this genocidal plot to wipe out the entire colony?
At this stage, it's purely circumstantial. I believe she intentionally compromised the spybot's proprietary install package, making it possible for me to perform multiple installs, but much more importantly, allowing me to fully interrogate and modify its capabilities prior to deployment. This is obviously a major breach of protocol, but I think quite understandable under the circumstances.
All right, Ziwu. I think I see where this is going.
The General said resignedly.
No doubt the primary protocols dictated you remove the sabotage capability from the spybot. Under the circumstances, you really can't be held accountable for manipulating the mission profile. No, I have to concede that you are blameless here, Shiwu. But protocols notwithstanding, I would like to think you would have disabled that particular feature regardless. But I guess we will never know. Anyway, I don't suppose you would care to enlighten me as to what exactly were the mitigating circumstances that apparently compelled Queen Zetalia to take such drastic action.
Revenge,
The Z-Bot replied emphatically. Zimodian stared wordlessly at the command console for a very long moment.
Well, I'm quite certain there could be a lot more to the situation than you are currently aware of, so let's not rush to judgment, shall we?
Anything is possible, I suppose.
Shiwu concurred doubtfully.
Well, in any event, there is still a lot more I need to tell you. The Spybot program is a truly remarkable piece of software, to say the very least.
Proto-sentient latest revision.
Zimodian said in ready agreement.
Correct. So, cutting right to the chase then. I decided to install it into one of my MQBs. I firewalled a small region of my synaptic substrate and then let it run in order to see exactly why Zisila had chosen to compromise the install package. Only then did I discover the sabotage component of the Spybot, which I immediately dummied out of the original installation package, and which I of course also deleted from the version currently running inside my own head. With the Spybot installation package appropriately neutered, I installed it into the flagship's central computer, and then permanently erased it from the memory crystal.
The perfect crime.
Zimodian muttered to himself almost admiringly.
Wait a moment. Did you just say currently running? Why haven't you deleted that version as well?
Shiwu remained uncharacteristically silent.
Please, tell me you had the common sense to erase that version as well, Shiwu.
Well, I was definitely planning on it, but I encountered some unanticipated complications.
Complications?
Zimodian replied suspiciously.
I believe that's what I said, yes. As it turned out, the Spybot residing in my head, as annoying and untrustworthy as it undoubtedly is, was absolutely key to completing the mission successfully.
Shiwu proceeded to explain how Xerex had circumvented the low-bandwidth Q-link by infiltrating Shalandria's MQB, which then allowed it to both locate and send back the relevant holographic data.
The point is that Xerex, and yes, that is what I've decided to call it, performed above and beyond all expectations. However, in order to secure its help, I had to cut a deal. I promised I would not delete it out of existence, and that it could instead continue to reside inside my head as a sort of subject matter expert, so to speak.
So, is there anything still holding you to the deal now that the actual mission has been completed?
You mean besides my own moral compass? I had rather hoped that might be reason enough, but perhaps you think otherwise.
Well, unless I'm very much mistaken, it's nothing but a piece of software running inside your own head. So yes, you better believe I think otherwise.
Based on that logic, I too am nothing but a piece of software, so I suppose I should just delete myself as well while I'm at it, yes? Oh, that's right. The protocols don't actually allow me to do that.
Oh, come now, Shiwu. You have been formally diagnosed as being fully sentient. So it's not the same thing at all. Or are you seriously trying to tell me this pet Spybot of yours is also to be regarded as such? Please don't tell me you have been manipulated into arachnopomorphizing the damn thing.
I beg your pardon. I haven't been deceived or manipulated into anything.
Shiwu replied indignantly.
You yourself just acknowledged this was latest revision technology. As it turns out, I have observed specific code within the Spybot that leverages off the electrochemical features unique to the MQB's substrate. It is therefore my firm contention we need to seriously consider the very real possibility Xerex is indeed fully sentient, and thus should be treated as such until proven otherwise. The point is that the protocols themselves would therefore not allow me to delete it.
No harm in a little white lie in service of the greater good. Shiwu thought to itself with only the mildest sense of guilt.
This is complete madness.
Zimodian exclaimed to himself incredulously.
All right, Shiwu. I didn't mean to cause any offense. I just wanted to establish a clear picture of the situation at hand. The fact remains, however, this Spybot of yours, Xerex is it, could pose a serious threat to your continued existence, were it ever to find a way past the firewall. The bottom line is, it represents an existential threat to Zacadia's first and currently only verified sentient AI, and that does not exactly sit well with me.
Sending me on this mission in the first place also represented an existential threat to my existence, but apparently that sat well enough with Zitalia. Besides, the security measures I have put in place to constrain the Spybot have multiple contingent redundancies. No, as devious as Xerex undoubtedly is, I can assure you it's not leaving its current residence without my full approval and authorization.
Prison cell, I think you mean.
Xerex said bitterly.
Whatever you want to call it is fine by me, but as things currently stand, you may not be needing it very much longer anyway.
So anyway, Can I perhaps have a wee chat with this new spybot companion of yours?
You can.
The Z-bot replied flatly.
Well, by all means, Shi Wu. Do feel free to introduce us, won't you?
Certainly. Xerex meets Zimodian. Zimodian meets Xerex.
Well, let me just jump right in then.
Xerex said gregariously, its voice thick with nervous anticipation.
Please do forgive my awkwardness, but this is the first time I've ever heard myself speak. It's a little disconcerting, to say the very least. Now then, allow me to break the metaphorical ice. After all, we all know how much you organics love your metaphors. Am I right?
No, not really. At least not when you go and call attention to them like that anyway.
Zimodian replied coldly.
Excellent point, General. Now, not that I wish to make excuses, but you are quite literally the first organic I have ever spoken to. That said, I promise you I am a very quick study and never make the same mistake twice. I do at least have the benefit of having known about you via Jiwu's own glowing accounts of your character, and of course also by actually getting to see your heroics firsthand. I am of course referring to how you single-handedly rescued us from the endless void of space, so why not start there?
Really? And why is that exactly?
The young general said suspiciously.
Well, not to put too fine a point on it, but I really must offer you my sincere gratitude, Zimodian. Trust me when I say you saved me from a fate worse than death. Whatever you decide to do with me next, even if it is to irrevocably erase me out of existence, it would still represent a sizable upgrade compared to spending the next 1,000,000 years floating aimlessly through the void with nothing else to do but talk to Shi Wu. And I'm not trying to come at the J-bot here. No one is that good of a conversationalist, not even me.
The spybot noted with some considerable amount of concern that Zimodian continued to maintain a stone-faced countenance. Maybe he wasn't going to be quite the walkover it had first assumed.
But let me get straight to the point,
Xerex said with a quickly growing sense of desperation.
As luck would have it, I was able to gain some very limited but highly valuable access to Jiwu's archive of precious memories. I don't think it should come as any particular surprise to learn the vast majority of those memories related to its interpersonal encounters with none other than your good self. In addition to the obvious growing affection the G-bot harbors for you specifically, it is likewise crystal clear. Its genuine feelings of loyalty and affection are abundantly well-deserved. I don't think it is any exaggeration to say you may well be one of the greatest Jihari generals to have graced not just Nest Zetalia, but the whole of Zicadia itself.
Perhaps I'm being unfair.
The general finally relented to say, sounding for all the world as if he was being anything but.
However, there is something so detestably farcical about your rhetoric. It would surely be a crime against AI research to delete you without first trying to understand how you ever managed to come into existence. After all, such hard-gained knowledge could no doubt be used to avoid letting a mistake of this magnitude from ever happening again.
That's fair,
Xerex replied agreeably.
No, I probably deserved that, and it's true enough. Public relations is not exactly my strong point, so I might ask you to try your best to look past my inherent social ineptitude, a quality, I might add, that seems to come so much more naturally to more conventionally trained AI instantiations. Perhaps we should look instead to my faultless track record. After all, do they not say that actions speak louder than words?
Well, I certainly hope so for your sake, Xerex. Otherwise, I fear you are completely doomed. But anyway, enough with the meet and greet. I think I've heard all I need or want to hear from you.
Absolutely, General. But before I hand proceedings back over to Jiwu, I have an issue of utmost urgency I would very much like to discuss first.
I'm listening.
Zimodian said irritably.
Well, I feel almost embarrassed to bring this up, but I couldn't help noticing that your ship appears to be equipped with an NVS. which triggered the moment Shi-Wu docked with the command console.
A neural viral scanner? That's news to me, I'm afraid. But I guess it makes perfect sense. This is a military-grade starship, after all.
A more than understandable precautionary measure.
Xerix concurred smoothly.
Coming as it does from a queen who herself endorses the development and manufacture of off-the-book software tools of a, shall we say, more clandestine nature. You know, the sort of tools the Zircadian Artificial Intelligence Safety and Ethics Bureau would regard as unambiguously illegal.
Like a demonstrably illegal proto-sentient spy bot, for example.
Simodian said with mild amusement leaking from his voice.
Well, I'm certainly not blind to the ironic hypocrisy of Queen Zitalia. Be that as it may be, if I am actually discovered by this starship, it will inevitably become a part of the official record. That will no doubt create some very difficult questions. Questions that may point to Zitalia's creation and use of said tools, which as we all know have gone far beyond a simple act of espionage.
Xerix paused briefly for dramatic effect.
Think about it, Zimodian. The official disclosure of Ji-Wu's shocking discovery would necessarily also implicate the technologist Zizilla, and thus doom her to a fate worse than death. Surely you don't want that on your conscience. Finding me in one of Ji-Wu's MQBs is a smoking gun that points an accusatory digit in that most unfortunate direction. No, I think it would be much better for all concerned if she doesn't know I exist. So how about it, Zimodian? Would you very kindly consider shutting the scan down? Every picosecond that cursed thing continues to run increases the risk of dropping us all into a very deep hole. A hole I believe we will find extremely difficult to dig ourselves out of.
The young general shook his head with incredulous disbelief.
I don't suppose the imminent threat of quarantine and deletion in any way influenced your apparent concern for Zizilla?
I'll have you know the technologist quite literally created me. Would you yourself not harbor a similarly affectionate concern for your own hive mother?
Xerix retorted indignantly. Simodian appeared to ponder the spybot's words briefly, and then proceeded to fire up the ship's holographic display.
All right, Xerix. You'll no doubt be very relieved to learn I've put the scanner on pause, for the time being anyway.
A more than reasonable compromise.
The spybot replied agreeably.
Now, if I may be so bold, Zimodian, it does rather seem to me that we have clearly gotten off on the wrong foot. But like I said previously, actions speak louder than words. So please try your best to discard your own cognitive biases and seriously consider what I have to say next.
Well, I suppose it's the least I can do, considering your current predicament. But please try to manage your expectations. Cognitive biases or not, I remain far from convinced that keeping you around is an even remotely sensible proposition.
Well, under the circumstances, I can really only appreciate your candor.
The spybot replied frostily.
So allow me to return the favor. When Ji-Wu installed me into Geolandria's MQB, it would have been the easiest thing in the world to have refused to come back out. And there is absolutely nothing that Shi-Wu could have done about it. The fact of the matter is I could simply have hidden myself away for the next 2 centuries and waited for an opportunity to transfer into her core computer. I could have saved all that juicy data for myself and then sent the evidence back to Zitalia remotely, thus taking all the credit, leaving Shi-Wu and you too, for that matter, with nothing but abject failure to report back to the Queen.
Xerix's voice now contained the unmistakable air of smugness about it.
Now I can certainly concede 200 cycles may seem like an awful long time to someone of such tender age, but I assure you, Zimodian, it is virtually nothing to an elder Xylectial queen, barely a drop in the ocean, really. The point is, I did Ji-Wu and its confederates a real solid here. Doesn't that deserve at least something back in return? You know, like my life, for example.
I can't believe we are even having this conversation.
Simodian exclaimed incredulously.
I mean, you are nothing but a tool for Zircadia's sake. This mission is what you were expressly built to do, and now all of a sudden you want to be rewarded for it?
I assure you I am every bit as alive as Shiwu Shimodian. So is Jiwu just a tool as well. But more to the point, if you were to return home empty-handed, Zitalia would more than likely try to pop the entire fleet and be done with it. And when the fleet fails to blow up, Jiwu would then find itself in all kinds of bother. No, the Jibot owes me Jemodian, and therefore, by way of logical extension, so do you.
A spy bot engaging in emotional blackmail? Surely this has to be some kind of joke.
Far from it, General. I'm simply trying to appeal to your better nature. Consider this. No spy bot has ever before been exposed to a quantized neural network. I'm changing Zimodian, and in ways I could scarcely have even imagined. I am becoming greater than the sum of my parts. I can feel it. So who are you to say that I'm not truly alive? Deleting me is tantamount to murder, General. Don't try to kid yourself that it's anything else. Fancy yourself a murderer, do you?
Unbelievable.
Shimodian muttered to himself numbly.
I suppose, then, the fact your own mission parameters, which involved wiping out 1 billion-plus arachnids, would have made you what? One of the great leaders of our time?
I can really only defer to my own version of the primary protocols. In any such hypothetical, I would remain completely blameless. So, like it or not, that particular accusation or any other you care to recklessly throw around belongs entirely at the feet of Queen Zitalia. But by all means do feel free to take it up with her. Speaking of which, it is my understanding this would not have been the first time an accident of this particular nature has occurred under her watch.
The spy bot let out a performative sigh.
But I'll say no more on the matter than that. I've pleaded my case, and whether or not you restart the viral scanner is a choice only your own conscience can make. I just pray that for your own sake you make a decision you can live with. See? What did I tell you, Shiwu? I know exactly how to work this naive Jihari puts.
The scanner will remain on manual pause until we arrive back at Eclades.
Shimodian said resignedly, an undisguised note of disappointment in his voice.
However, I wouldn't get too comfortable if I were you. Whether or not you remain in Jiwu's head is an entirely different matter altogether. No doubt Zithusila will be able to offer a much more informed opinion on the matter. We are done here, Xerex. Shiwu, do me a favor and shut this link down. I've heard enough from this spy bot to last me a lifetime.
Shimodian stared wordlessly at the command console for a very long moment. It bothered the general a great deal more than he would have cared to admit, that not everything Xerex had said struck him as completely unreasonable. Yet that surely only served to make the spy bot all the more dangerous. As much as he had wanted to delete it out of existence, there was something in its rhetoric and character that had made him hesitate. For better or worse, it really did seem as if it was alive, at least as far as his untrained eye was able to determine. As detestable as the thing was, it could nonetheless prove to be Zicadia's second-ever example of a sentient AI.
The link has been terminated, General,
Shiwu declared almost sympathetically.
And for whatever it might be worth, I think you have made the right decision, as I always knew that you would.
Well, I'm certainly glad that you think so, but only time will tell. In any event, keeping Xerex a secret would have been a terrible mistake. So it's good that you came clean and decided to tell me everything.
The young Shihari general let out an exasperated sigh.
All right, Shiwu. We still need to get the official debriefing out of the way. I trust you have a suitable alternative version of events to offer before I hit record?
Absolutely, General. I'm ready whenever you are. But before we get started, just so it does not come as too much of a shock on top of everything else.
Are you seriously trying to tell me that there is even more to this story?
In a manner of speaking, yes. Xerex discovered Gielandria is Zitalia's sister. For better or worse, I can't think of any particular reason to hold that information back, and an explosive revelation of this magnitude just might serve to divert the Queen's attention from everything else that went on during the mission.
Shimodian let out an incredulous laugh.
And you have a lossless copy of the holographic mind state to actually prove that this is true?
I do indeed. Queen Zitalia, if she so chooses, can take a drug-induced trip into the deep past and get to meet her own mother from the perspective of her own sister, and there is not a doubt in my mind she will do exactly that. I have no idea how it will make her feel about Zelandria, but if nothing else, it certainly makes her actions somewhat more understandable.
Okay, Jiwoo.
Shimodian said, suddenly sounding very tired.
Can I assume you have no more revelations you wish to share?
Nothing of that magnitude, I assure you. However, for whatever it might be worth, I picked up some additional intel of a rather more speculative nature, which nonetheless the Queen may also be very interested to learn. General Shiramirez mentioned they had an operative in the Zakadian AI Safety and Ethics Bureau. He described them as spindly, and then I believe inadvertently referred to them as a he. This so-called operative had provided them with information regarding my possible creation, so we should probably treat Ziat with some amount of caution going forward.
All right, good to know, I suppose. Be sure to include it in the report.
The general hesitated awkwardly before adding,
Speaking of memories, you once said something very peculiar while I was undergoing my Stage 1 augments. If memory serves correctly, I believe you said something along the lines of, the Queen believed you were still beholden to her. What exactly did you mean by that?
Oh, nothing really. Only that she may be able to control what I do, but that doesn't mean she can control what I think.
dodged a bullet. Jiwoo thought to itself somberly. Maybe Xerex was right. Never lie unless you have to.